Are there other avian disease concerns other than avian flu?
There were a number cited by the Board of Health. I unfortunately did not bring the list of the avian diseases that were listed at the meeting, but there were a number that were of concern stated by the board members.
Have we had reported cases of those avian diseases in other birds in Arlington?
There are a number of avian diseases carried by birds in Massachusetts. There was recently a study conducted, I believe it was by the USDA, on geese in Arlington, and there were a number of diseases that were found in the fecal matter left behind by the geese.
Thank you. So there are avian diseases already in Arlington, in the geese, I'm sure the pigeons carry them too. I don't see that as a major health concern if the chickens are in a carefully controlled space. The other question I had was about cleanliness. Ms. Calloway has said that there are guidelines around cleanliness. If there's a cleanliness complaint, what would happen?
Ms. Sharkey.
Christine Sharkey, Director of Health and Human Services. If there were an issue with cleanliness of the coop, the Board of Health would most likely conduct an inspection and cite the owner of the coop if there were an issue, a violation.
So they would get a fine, most likely?
It is up to town meeting. The bylaw before you defines the violation.
I think that's very appropriate. If there's a cleanliness issue, that obviously is going to cause a potential odor issue for neighbors, and I think that should be addressed when that issue arises. So I don't see that as an objection to the article per se. If there's an issue, it can be addressed. So I continue to support Articles 11 and 12. Thanks.
Thank you. Gentleman back here. Yes.
I'm Ted Sharp from Precinct 7, and I'd like to just start out by saying that, like the selectmen, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the Board of Health. I think public health workers are truly the unsung heroes of medicine. They rarely get the limelight, but they do enormous good work. We've started tickling around the edges of what I wanted to say. Density in itself is not a reason not to do this. Density is a situation that might exacerbate reasons not to do it. So let's tick off what those are. We've just heard a couple. Noise is a potential nuisance factor, but they're not noisy. I have mockingbirds in my neighborhood that sing all day and all night long, and they're a lot noisier than chickens. Crows, mourning doves. I mean, noise really just isn't an issue here. Odor. Poor animal husbandry could lead to a problem with odor. The bylaw you're being asked to vote on very specifically addresses that. If there's an odor problem, the permit's going to be revoked. End of the odor, because end of the chickens. Rodents, again, poor husbandry could lead to a problem with attracting rats, and the bylaw is very specific. If that situation should occur, the permit's going to be revoked, and it's going to be the end of that problem. Disease vectors. Now, here, I mean, I think that there are genuine risks, but I think they're quite negligible. Avian flu hasn't been seen within thousands of miles of here. So that's not really an issue. There are some avian diseases that are present, in fact, in our community. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there have been crows with West Nile found in Arlington. The bylaw attempts to address that, in my opinion, quite negligible risk by saying that we're going to isolate these domestic animals from wild birds. I think that talking about filling the town with birds is hyperbolic in the extreme. We're not talking about thousands or even probably hundreds of birds. We're talking about a few dozens of birds. The avian vector load on the town will be negligibly increased. You could argue that there's a little bit more opportunity for human contact, but again, in my opinion, I've got to think from what I've read about it that the risks are quite negligible. And I'd like to point out here that we hire the Board of Health to protect us from even minor risks if they're avoidable. That's not their job. I would expect them not to come to us and say, well, there are some risks. I don't recommend you do it, because if there ever should be a problem, that would be pretty bad for them. That's not their job. It's our job to weigh the pros and cons and to decide whether the slight risks on the one hand are outweighed by the advantages on the other. And speaking of those advantages, I guess I would point to tradition. People who have been in town for a while probably have aged relatives who will remember having chickens in Arlington. This is kind of this complete prohibition against, all livestock, and I'm not suggesting we go anywhere further than having a few hens, is a kind of a Johnny-come-lately. So out of respect for tradition, I'd encourage you to do this. Out of respect for the indigent among us in these parlous economic times, who might really benefit, who might actually have a necessity. And, for the locavores and greenies who think it'd be cool, that's fine too. And basically for libertarian reasons, if we can manage this thing, why shouldn't we let people do what they want to do, for heaven's sakes? So I would like to invite you to weigh the pros and cons and realize that there are some small risks, and I think that they're far outweighed by the advantages. And in closing, I'd just like to say that when I first told my mother about this, she regaled me with a long story about growing up in extreme poverty in the Great Depression, in, by the way, far denser conditions in Arlington. And the first sentence out of her mouth was, "Oh, I really hope you can find a way to do this. I think that would be wonderful." And as I cautioned the selectmen in their first hearing on this issue, she is a formidable woman, and I wouldn't oppose her if I were you.
Mr. Starr?
Ed Starr, Precinct 15. I was going to speak on this thing, but it's been covered quite carefully, I think, at this point, so I move the question and all things pertaining to it.
Yeah, I know. Ed, you had to just say move the question. What's your point of order?
You have to move immediately. You can't speak first. He's on the issue.
I agree with you. I was just making that point. I was actually telling him when you jumped up. You had to either say move the question or something else, Ed. I'm sorry. We'll hope someone else does so. Mr. Deist. Thank you, Mr. Deist. We have a motion to We have a motion. Is that on all matters before us? We have a motion to terminate debate on all matters before us in this article. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed, say no. Unanimous vote.